Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at in your lives today. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Marcus Motor-Chandler. I'm Brett Derickson. This is Schoolhouse Cracked, where we take a look at the things that challenge the foundation of American public schools, and we discuss what the solutions are and what we can do about them, and help you guys come to some conclusions about what the issues are.
All right, so be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast channels. Subscribe on YouTube. Email us your thoughts, comments, feedback at schoolhousecracked@gmail.com. So, Brett, today this has been something that we've been seeing in the media recently as a hot point, and we've seen it in a local school district, actually 2 local school districts in our region. But SEL, the concept of SEL, social emotional learning. So, what's your level of familiarity with it as somebody in a school, and what's your level of familiarity with even that term?
Great, yeah, I appreciate you asking it that way.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's another one of those things. I know I do this all the time, but it's like what's the timeline for me and how this is evolved. I would say that social emotional learning is something that we understand in schools right now as the very specific and intentional ways that we go about within our whole school culture, or even with inside of our curriculum, of helping students and adults work together on emotional regulation, on the skills that it takes to have relationships, to handle the challenges and pressures of schooling, all those things that trigger emotion in the human being that are related to the overall school. And going back into, I didn't know this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have known that social emotional learning, or SEL, would even be a topic that is generated in our communities, or that has controversy among school boards or the media. Back again when I started in 1999, the kind of concept emerged as like the whole child, or holistic learning, and what that meant is beyond the traditional content curriculum, what needs to be taught, learned, and practiced inside the schoolhouse or inside the public school that is good for kids and adults. I think it's evolved in the things that you and I are familiar with, from PBIS, positive behavior support systems, to MTSS, to RTI. These are educational buzzwords, which simply mean to folks that are completely unfamiliar out there, are just the systems that we have in place to positively reinforce behaviors, and
beyond,
to make sure,
beyond the academics.
Yes,
beyond the core curriculum, beyond the
academics. And now we call it social emotional learning, and somehow this has become something that is of significant concern in the public sphere.
Yeah, what I find most fascinating is we've, I came into public education, background in psych and counseling, and these were things that we've been doing since I came into that role almost about 2 decades ago. And like helping students understand their emotions and how to self-regulate, and so we've been doing this for decades, and now it's become this hot button issue, and it's kind of been co-opted, I think. And so when I was a school counselor, if a student had a bad interaction with a friend at breakfast, it could ruin their whole day. And so as a counselor, I would see them, and we'd talk about how they were feeling, how they could regulate their emotion, and how they could prevent that interaction from derailing their whole day. And I don't know, as a parent of 3 kids who regularly have interactions that don't always go great in a day, what do you want your kids to experience in school?
I just this week, I don't know if we had a chance to totally catch up on it or not. One of my kids is struggling significantly emotionally. I'm seeing it at home, and we had a really, really tough interaction with our son. It was heart-wrenching. It had to do with that kind of schoolwork balance, the challenges of being a high school athlete, him not feeling supported at home, him feeling like we don't understand what he's going through, or the difficulties that he has with his challenging coursework and with football. And the first thing that I did was email a school counselor the next day and just put it out to this professional that we are struggling as a family at home, that we think that we're really trying to support our kids' success, but that we're out of our realm, and that we need help. I'm hoping that my son feels comfortable speaking to this person about even the things that he doesn't like, that the language I use, or the tone of my voice, or the decisions that I make, or whatever else it is. But ultimately, I'm looking for exactly what you just said, is that she will have some strategies that he can walk away with that, or don't just make him feel better in that moment, because that stressful pre-calculus moment is coming again. That feeling too tired after football practice to do homework and not wanting to have a conversation with your parents about, I don't know, the poor decision that we thought he made.
Right.
I mean, he's going to need something more than the outbursts and the unregulated anger. The point would be is that, Marcus, I do hope that teachers at his school and mental health professionals at his school can help him, because we're not a perfect family. We're perfect in our love for each other, but in the way that we raise our children, I mean, I'm sure that we're making a lot of mistakes.
Well, you're all skill building in that regard. So one of the things that we talked about, and you were kind of surprised by, is SEL's become this big kind of boogeyman word. And what most folks don't know is the root of SEL goes back almost 70 years, 63, 64 years to Yale School of Medicine.
Yeah.
And it came out of their Child Studies Center. And then SEL, as we know and practice it today in schools, actually started in 1994.
Yeah.
And so this is not some new secret curriculum. This has been, hell, as a kid, I went through some of this emotional skill building with my teachers and my counselors. Like, hey, you had a really negative peer interaction, you're angry, how do we prevent that anger from turning into like a physical fight on the playground?
Yeah.
And those are skills that were embedded and taught both in classroom guidance, like classroom counseling lessons with teachers. And so I find it odd that it's become such a hot button topic when this has been around for so long. Why do you, I mean, you're in the schools with the kids right now and dealing with parents. Why is this such a hot button issue now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just cut right to it. And, we live in an interesting community. We live where focus on the family is. And I think that, without taking shots at that organization's been very important to my parents and how they raised us, and to my faith background. But the foundation of focus on the family would be almost directly related to social emotional learning. It's a training center for families on how to guide and interact inside of your marriage, inside of the nuclear family, and with your kids. Like no organization to my knowledge has been more integral and really helping parents decide what is healthy for their kids and how to rear your kids. If you've ever read a Dr. Dobson book, it is about how you use language and about how kind you are and about how you follow up with discipline and all kinds of things that if you kind of pull it apart is what SEL is in schools. To answer your question, I think the reason why social emotional learning has become controversial in schools is because there are too many different factions within our society who are wanting to own what is the kind of emotional well-being of the child, and instead of wondering how we're going to partner and support it. So schools have been left so much, we cannot reach the child through curriculum and teaching and learning processes if we cannot have them in a mental and emotional place where they are capable and ready to learn. You cannot have rigorous learning opportunities and challenging critical thinking exercises if the headspace of the child is divided with emotion, fear, anxiety.
Yeah, you can't go out and run a race unless you've warmed up.
Yeah.
And so this is taking care of those foundational needs.
Yeah.
I'm not going to want to learn algebra if I'm still worried about the interaction I had with my girlfriend when I'm a sophomore, right?
Yeah.
Oh, she didn't hold my hand and get past me a note during passing period. I'm in my head now.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it's become a problem is because when schools go to mentally emotionally take care of children, it has to and will always include all children. And at the political point that we're at in our country, there are too many fringe groups who want to decide what is a kid that is worth loving and worth taking care of and worth protecting, and what ideas of inclusion are allowed. And in schools, social and emotional learning does include all kids and the whole child, and that would include controversial things like gender identity and sexual identity and so on and so forth, because so many of those students are at risk for not being taken care of or cared for or ready to be in the learning space. And so I think what we've done is essentially combine social emotional learning with politically controversial things with kids.
Right. And we know the research has told us over decades that when the student feels like they belong, they achieve better in school. And so trying to find all the ways in which students don't belong and addressing them through SEL. So one of the things that I think also gets misunderstood in social emotional learning are the components of SEL and what are not components of SEL. And so the original, going back to the 90s, focus and function of social emotional learning was on 5 things: self-awareness, self-monitoring, kind of that self-regulation, self-management. So like if I'm angry, I'm not acting out in anger in the classroom, things like that. Developing social skills, social awareness, developing the relationship skills. So like I can develop a friendship with you, I can engage in a social interaction with you, and then making positive decisions for myself and socially. And so I really struggle with looking at kind of the focus of what I would do as a school counselor and working with children is I want you to be able to get through your school day in a way that you can self-regulate, self-manage, and increase some self-awareness and grow. I want you to go home over winter break for 2 weeks and not slip into a depressive state. I want to develop some skills. And so I tell you, I'm not indoctrinating kids. I never indoctrinated kids. And if I had that ability, I would be in a very different field. And I hear the meme and the joke all the time. It's like, we're not indoctrinating your kids. We can't even get them to bring a pencil to class or stay off their phones. And so I just deep in my heart, I think I want all kids. I think of my nieces and my nephew. I want all kids to be able to talk about their emotions, be able to understand how they self-regulate their emotions, and develop social skill to connect with peers and adults in meaningful ways. I struggle with why that's a problem.
I do too, and I think that I really firmly believe that if community members were to come into schools, we're making a large effort in our community to find more and more ways in which adults can, family members and community members can be in our building during the school day. And I'm not talking about the potluck dinners and things like that, and those things have a good place too, where maybe you put on a neat little program about cell phone usage, and you bring in some experts and people come in and have chili or whatever. That's wonderful. But
now, mind you, cell phone use would also fall under self-regulation.
Yes.
So parents, if your kids are on their phones too much, we're trying to help you with that self-regulation piece.
Yeah, and just have people that are like, I explained to a parent, like, man, like we are experts in this building in child development. Like that's really like our business. And so when we talk about some of these things that are challenging that family and that child, we feel like we are people who can speak to our expertise. But with that being said, we want people in our building to see that social emotional learning means that we have regular practices of like acknowledging like really positive behaviors. Our principal will get on the announcements, and we'll have a theme for the week about how we're going to treat each other, and then we'll hand out little awards and have special acknowledgments so that kids are learning a lot of like knowing what these skills are, getting an opportunity to practice them, and being recognized and getting feedback for them. But the point though is that we're not going around like constantly pushing an agenda on these things that are being associated with it. And like I've been watching one of these school boards go after social emotional learning, and again there's no, it doesn't seem that these 2 school board members in this district have a clue. I don't think if they were guests on the podcast, I don't think they would be able to challenge us with a question like, oh yes, but you're teaching this.
Where it came from, what the research says, what are the components of it, and actually how it's implemented.
And what we're being accused of teaching is simply just not true. Like we're not teaching anything about gender or sexuality or identity. Those aren't for us. What we are teaching is you can be kind to this person or that person or whatever else, and here's some ways for you to handle like being in a group with somebody who has a significant difference from you, or so on and so forth. But we have no desire. I have no desire to shape the future culture of America. What we want to do is like be able, like you just said, be able to operate in a place where kids can learn.
The one thing, there's 2 sides to this argument around SEL we see playing out in the national news and the media and even locally. And on one side, it's a belief, and it's been co-opted, that there's some indoctrination happening. On the other side, there is, and I would argue, and what I would agree with this argument, that because SEL has its roots dating back so long as it does, and when it was created and by who it was created by, it is inherently a Eurocentric kind of Western lens, and it doesn't capture the social emotional development of a variety of distinct cultures and backgrounds, and so that's been part of the dialogue on the other side is, does SEL overemphasize social emotional learning from a strictly Eurocentric lens? And I wouldn't say that it explicitly does that, but it also doesn't explicitly address diversity within SEL either.
No, I think it goes to show just a gap in so many institutions, public school being one of the most important, is when you don't have diversity in leadership across the institution, then we're going to make selections that are most comfortable to us and like most natural to us. So if someone were to say hey Brett, is your guys' model of social emotional learning or even your curriculum or whatever Eurocentric, I would say, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's not intentional. But what I can tell you is that when we're looking at even taking a look at those 5 components of social emotional learning: self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation, social awareness, relationships, so on and so forth. Well, I help kids through the lens of like Brett Derickson. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to choose and select as a priority within our school, like what we're going to focus on or whatever, because of what I think is best for our kids, analyzing what we're struggling with as a student body or as a faculty, and then saying, hey, why don't we approach it from this angle? Well, every time I do that with, like a primarily, white Protestant background group of leaders, I am at risk of selecting the things that are comfortable and that I'm knowledgeable in.
And so that's the risk and kind of the argument on the other side of this with SEL is that we know we lack diversity in public ed and leadership nationally. There's underrepresentation. Our faculties don't always match our kids, and inevitably then those folks select curriculum. And so yes, we're going to interact with the world from our own perspective, and then we try to take the perspective of others as educators, absolutely. But then sometimes we fall into that pitfall of selecting a curriculum that feels comfortable to us. And so there is an effort to increase the scope of inclusiveness within SEL curriculum, specifically like the lessons that are purchased by a school or utilized by a school, to encompass kind of all the students we're working with. And so I think that feeds into the other side of that argument that is, quote, indoctrination just by trying to be inclusive. And I do not think those things are similar. I think they're two very different things happening. Is I want all the students in my school to feel included, like they belong. They feel safe. They're building skills to function and relate to others and adults. And by expanding that scope, by opening up our aperture there, I fear that that's also feeding into some of these arguments against it. But again, folks aren't diving into what this stuff is. We talked a long time ago about banned books. We did an episode on banned books week. And my argument was, read the damn book. Like, many folks on boards are fighting against books they've never actually read. And many folks are arguing against SEL. And I watched a great segment where an interviewer was asking the community members what SEL even stood for, and they couldn't. They couldn't tell you what the acronym was.
I guess that's my primary issue, Marcus. So I mean, just being totally honest, it's like what we're having right now is a full-on attack on a component of schools, which is, it's kind of ironic, folks. Like, it's one of the things that we've also talked about teacher burnout. Social emotional learning is an add-on into the responsibility of a school. We have gone through time where it's like, you send your kids ready for school, and we will have people who are trained in content and curriculum, and they will help them learn whatever that content and curriculum is. Now, what the teacher feels like, and what I feel like as an administrator, and this is being just boldly honest, is that you send us whatever you want, and we're supposed to take care of so many things. And I'm not putting these things down. I'm just saying we have free breakfast and free lunch. We have added an intense number of mental and emotional support staff, people that didn't even exist in schools when you and I were attending schools. From the school counselor lens, we've added a significant component on the counseling and away from just like academic advising. Our teachers we are doing social emotional learning lessons. We have,
and I'll, like I said, I've been doing what would be classified as social emotional lessons for 2 decades, and so it's not new. I was teaching kids about acceptance and understanding differences with kindergartners using a little Nemo cartoon, so they could appreciate Nemo's little fin. And like, am I indoctrinating? It was like, no, Nemo was different, but we still like Nemo, and we still treat Nemo well.
Well, and we're going so far in our schools to have kids setting goals. Like they are identifying emotional regulation is a challenge to them, and like, what is it that they want to do? They want to have less arguments with their friends, or so on and so forth. The whole point is that we have added significantly on. However, schools are being criticized for taking on the challenge of helping our kids grow through the really difficult thing of being in front of a screen all the time, social media, coming through COVID. Schools are responding by thinking to themselves like, hey, how can we have our kids processing regularly and getting feedback from trusted adults? And we're building clubs and organizations around kids becoming leaders within their school and improving their schools and setting. I mean, all this is more, yet so much of the critics out there don't have a clue what it is. And I've got a family member who's one of these like hypercritical people of these different things. And if you took a label off of it, I think that my brother would be like, hey, that's pretty cool
Classroom
stuff.
counseling lessons.
Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff, man. So leadership's kind of a program for all kids.
Friendship building.
Yeah.
It used to be called back in the day character development lessons, right? It's part of the character development lessons. We're like, we make friends. We're nice to people. And I mean, the character development stuff's been around for forever. So, folks, I would just say, regardless of what side of the debate you are on SEL, let's not blow it out of proportion. The heart of educators, folks like Brett and I, is to help your kids develop skills that will lend themselves towards successful adulthood. Whether it's an ability to make friends, an ability to regulate strong emotions and not have it derail your day, or just the ability to be kind to one another. And we know socially there's a lot of stuff we've seen in the news and you see on social media about people not being kind. And so that's our goal. Like we just want to help kids grow into themselves in ways that are positive. And we also want to keep them off their phones.
Yeah, and I would close out with a couple of other comments, folks. If you are struggling with this and you're listening to this podcast, you're like, oh, this is just a couple of yahoos like just telling us that schools need to raise your kids. That's not it. I'll ask you this: do you work with adults that have problems with emotional regulation and social skills and so on and so forth? Possibly whose inability to make connections on the team at your work keep everybody from doing their best job. Well, that's because this is something that we all really struggle with. If you're scared and frustrated, no matter where you're at on the gun debate, but if you are sad and frustrated and upset with what happens inside of our schools when it comes to school violence and schools being targets of school violence, if you've talked about bullying, well, we can't continue to have these problems, these linchpin problems within our culture without some sort of approach to upstreaming and having a proactive approach to
prevention.
And social emotional learning takes many forms in different schools and school districts. You can get involved and have a voice in what you think is appropriate or what the focal point should be. But if we just decide that we're going to throw political rhetoric on this without knowing what it is, that's too bad, because just like Dr. Moore Chandler said, this is a way of us making sure that our schools are places that kids can thrive.
So thanks for tuning in. With me is Mr. Brett Derickson. I'm Dr. MC. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast channels. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on social media. And send us your thoughts, comments, feedback at schoolhousecracked@gmail.com. We'll see you in our next episode.
Take care.